First of all, thank you all for coming tonight. There are a lot of things going on, and it's nice to see you. And also, I want to acknowledge Erica, who has joined us, interested in what we're trying to do in the Environment Committee and in us as a community. And as you know, or have been writing, what? I'm good? Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Oh, I have to sign back. Oh, once I'm in. Oh.
Once you're in, all right. We good? All right. The Environment Committee established a goal for Horizon House in to reach carbon neutrality by 2032. And we were given resources by the administration to actually work on that and give the data, do the work to actually figure out what the path is to get there. This is not, for us, an aspirational goal. It is a practical goal that we want to work toward. And so part of that is we want to put together something that works for the community as a whole. We've invited Jessyn Farrell, Mayor Harrell's Director of Sustainability and Environment, here tonight to share her valuable perspective on how we can, as a community, can reach that goal. In my career at King County Metro, I had the opportunity to work with Jessyn on many transit sustainability issues and initiatives. I first met Jessyn when she led the Transportation Choices Coalition, a very powerful nonprofit advocacy group, which became a force in the early part of this of the 20s, forced to assure that transit became a significant part of the transportation policy, for both the state and the city. She then moved on to represent the Northeast Seattle at the 46th Legislative District, and eventually was asked to serve as the vice chair of the Transportation Committee of the legislature. In that key role, Jessyn was able to expand state transportation funding beyond highways to include significant resources for transit, pedestrian, and bicycle development. Historically, the state legislature has thought of roads and ferries as their only funding responsibility. With that changing mindset, which Jessyn fostered, she played a critical role in authorizing sound transit expansion, but also required sound transit to provide land for affordable housing. As a matter of fact, the land up at the corner of Madison and Boylston, I believe it was made available for housing because of that requirement. And it was really another breakthrough. Wisely, Mayor Harrell has recognized her leadership and the many contributions to a sustainable Seattle and appointed her Director of Sustainability and Environment in 2022. It's my pleasure and a distinct privilege to introduce Jessyn Farrell to you this evening. Jessyn?
Good evening, everyone. The first thing you're going to get to see me do is sign into my computer, and you will get to see if I recall my password under pressure. So, pressure I'm sure you all can relate to. Et voilà. So good evening. It is so nice to see all of you. Can everyone hear me? I want to start with that first. Okay, great. So thanks to Bill for his warm introduction and for inviting me here. We have been longtime co-conspirators on all issues transit related, and so it's a delight to get to be here tonight and to work with all of you in reaching your sustainability goals. And I'd also like to say a thank you to Erica, the director, for hosting me tonight. It's so nice to get to meet you, and it'll be wonderful to get to continue to partner with you. So as you all know, I am what I call a recovering politician. I may fall off the wagon, but I'm in recovery right now. And I have the wonderful privilege of getting to work for the Harrell administration as the director of the Office of Sustainability. So tonight we are going to talk about sustainability and Horizon House and kind of the broader, how that is nested in broader city policy. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And then we will save time for questions. Let's see. Well, I guess we'll use the clicker. Also, something I know everyone... Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. We can just do it this way. Okay. Technology is both our savior and the bane of our existence. So here we go. Okay, so I just want to start by really touting Mayor Harrell's One Seattle concept. What I love about it in this time of deep polarization is it not only says what we are one Seattle in spite of our differences and maybe united by all of our differences, but it's also a way, it also describes how we are doing things, which is really, across the city. And with the issue of climate change, we're really in this moment where it's an all hands on deck issue. If we're going to get in front of this and really preserve the earth for, our children, grandchildren, and future generations, it's going to take each one of us. And that's why it's so wonderful to be here tonight, working together as one Seattle to achieve truly a sustainable place. So the great news is that Horizon House is already a sustainability leader. You have already been partnering with the city to improve energy efficiency, to improve water conservation. You were part of a 2013 case study that really helped chart the course for a lot of these things. And one of the really wonderful things is that this is a very engaged community and that you're really, through the Environmental Sustainability Committee, really part of the effort to create a sustainable community. So I just want to note, before we get into the policy details, there's already been a lot of work done in this community, and it's really exciting. So, of course, we all know we are in the midst of a climate emergency. It's no longer something that is going to happen many years in the future. It's something that we experience now many, many days of the year. In Seattle, of course, we experience smoke, and that affects any of us who have respiratory problems. We experience heat for a city that doesn't have a lot of air conditioning. That's especially concerning for senior citizens. And then we have flooding. As we know, the Duwamish River flooded just this past winter. We didn't think that was going to happen until, another 10, 15 years out. But now suddenly we're having to plan for regular flooding in a part of the city that we really didn't anticipate this happening. So we know that climate change is happening and that for every step that we're able to take now to kind of keep the heat down, it means the weather impacts and the climate impacts are going to be less severe. Although, of course, what we are realizing is it's already happening, and so part of our job is to adapt. And so this decade, Seattle has been a long leader, and so it's really exciting to get to work for the city in this capacity. And this next decade is really critical. So the steps that we're taking every day from here on out are really important to making sure that we're kind of mitigating the worst effects of climate change and really focusing on environmental justice. And when I talk about environmental justice, I'm talking about how in our society, we have often the people who have experienced racism, who've experienced economic impacts, are also the people who have experienced environmental harms. And so in Seattle, we have really been focusing on how do we center environmental justice as part of our response. And so before we get into what's happening at Horizon House in the coming months and years, I just wanted to kind of embed it in the city's broader climate agenda, just to give you a broader perspective. So we are working through what we call the One Seattle Climate Justice Agenda, and there are 3 parts to this. Number 1 is an equitable, clean energy economy. As many of you who maybe have been environmental activists your whole life, you may know that sometimes, blue issues, labor issues, economic issues, and environmental issues get pitted against each other. And so we're being really intentional about making sure that we're building pathways to this massive green energy transformation that we're going through. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to really state that we're being really intentional about the economic impacts and making sure that the economic benefits are felt widely instead of just accrued by the few who already have so much. The second important part, of course, is that we need to transition away from fossil fuels. And in Seattle, that means we need to decarbonize our buildings and we need to decarbonize transportation. We're going to talk a little bit more about buildings, but in the transportation world, it's pretty simple. Well, maybe it's not that simple, but there are really two big things we need to do. We need to drive less, so walk, bike, transit, and that's what Bill and I have been working on and for the last couple of decades. And that it also means for those trips that we're still driving, we need to electrify. So that is the work before us on this one. And then the third one is healthy, resilient communities. People are already experiencing climate change. And so how are we making sure that there's built-in resilience, that people are able to feel safe and secure in spite of the changing climate? And so I can take just a little bit more and to drill down a little bit more into each of those pieces. So to build an equitable, clean energy economy, it means, of course, investing in the green workforce. So it's those jobs that are really doing the work to electrify our buildings, but it's also the works of engineers and designers. It's the work around clean transportation. It's the manufacturing work. And in this city where there is so much income inequality and so much of our income inequality is felt by race, part of what we are trying to do is to make sure that we're investing in women and minority-owned businesses, that we're really focusing on youth mentorship, and we're trying to learn better about how we really measure that impact. One of the things I'll go off on just a tangent for a moment. You may be aware in Seattle that the black-white wealth gap, white families have 10 times the income of the average black family. And so how are we using wealth measurement as we're deploying these environmental investments to measure our success in closing that gap? So that's a little bit about how we're fostering a clean energy economy and what that means. And then a just transition from fossil fuels. So one of the things that we need to do ahead of us in the next 10, 15, 20 years is make sure, first of all, every new building is carbon neutral, retrofit all existing buildings, including buildings like this, but also every residential building in Seattle. And then, as I said before, we need to reduce our car trips and electrify our transportation. It's really easy. This is all we have to do. And together we will do it. And then finally, really investing in community health and resilience. And this is in part place-based strategies. Every neighborhood in Seattle is going to need something a little different. If you live in South Park along the Duwamish River, there are going to be real flooding impacts, gentrification, potential, anti-gentrification displacement that we need to be focusing on. If you live in the Rainier Valley, where there is a lack of tree canopy, we'll be investing in tree canopy to make sure that we have the cooling benefits of trees. And then also making sure that we have what people need in the face of a dangerous weather event, which of course are happening more and more. Access to air conditioning, access to a safe place if you're a kid to go do your sports inside instead of having to be kept inside on the smoke days, et cetera. So there's a lot that we need to do to adapt right now so that we can live within the changing climate. Okay, so buildings can confront climate change. The standard written English editor in me here really realizes, well, buildings can't actually confront climate change. We are the ones, but you'll forgive this standard written English error here. But what we really need to do is eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. And so that is where we get to talk about the building emissions performance standard that we have been working on for the last couple years very diligently. And so why are we focusing on buildings? Buildings are actually a pretty big chunk of our emissions, 35%. And you can see, though, transportation is another big one. So I hope I get to come back in a few months and talk about transportation. So I'm going to really dig into BEPS, Building Emissions Performance Standard, because that's going to be one of the ways that we'll get to partner with Horizon House in the coming years. Okay, so what the heck is BEPS? So the first thing that it does is for large buildings, buildings over 20,000 square feet, so the big ones, it sets carbon emissions reduction targets that buildings must meet over time. So it's not something that has to happen next year. It's something that building owners and operators actually have several years and decades to plan for and then implement, with the goal of having all of these buildings carbon neutral by 2050. So the goal here is to really send the signal to building owners and operators so that you can do the planning, because changing out energy systems and upgrading energy systems in buildings like these is a really heavy lift. And so we want to make sure that there's time and resources and the ability to plan. And so it provides a framework for owners to transition buildings. And what's really important is there's a lot of flexibility built in. No building is alike, and there are different pathways that building owners can choose to get on the pathway to getting carbon neutral. And again, the most important thing is that it's identifying long-term expectations so that building owners and operators can plan, because these are really big investments. Okay, so here are some examples of some of the buildings that this will cover, the large ones. Buildings 20,000 square feet and above. So there are 4,000 buildings in the city that come under this umbrella. And Horizon House is quite large. The footprint of the whole campus is over 800,000 square feet, and that's not including parking, but it's a really big, has a big footprint in our community. And so the basic framework that a building owner or operator will get to operate under is, first of all, measuring building energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And the good news is that in Seattle, we've been doing that now for a decade. The City of Seattle and the Office of Sustainability partners with buildings to measure energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, and actually already does efficiency improvements. So the good news is we have a long track record of working together, and we have a lot of tools and technical support that's already in place for buildings owners to be able to tap into. And so once this legislation is passed, building owners will then have time to plan and identify, documenting current performance, current equipment, and then laying out the actions that are needed to achieve the targets. And again, those actions, there's quite a bit of flexibility within them, because we recognize that there's just a lot of differences within buildings. And so then you meet the greenhouse gas emissions targets. There are 3 pathways to do so. And again, the goal is net zero emissions between 2041 and 2050, depending on where you are in the cycle. And so this is a very complicated timeline. We have gone through many iterations trying to make this a little easier to understand, but bear with me. Across the top, you see what are the compliance intervals. So, over the next 4 years, we're passing the legislation, we're doing rulemaking, and we're getting everything ready for that first target in 2027, which isn't actually an emissions target, but it's a planning target. It's that moment where we start working with building owners to document what's inside the buildings and how are we going to actually get to the decarbonization. And, of course, throughout all of this early period, we are going after federal and state funding. We are partnering with building owners who are ready to go, and we're really incentivizing early action, but not requiring it. So there's a little difference there. And then starting in 2031, we start getting into targets that need to start being met. And then non-residential has a particular time horizon, and multifamily emissions targets are somewhat different, and they're actually later targets for affordable housing, recognizing that it will take time and it will take resources that we need to get in place to be able to decarbonize affordable housing units. And we'll have to really work in partnership to do that. And then, of course, the state has a new energy efficiency standard or energy performance standard that's coming into play. And as you all know, the city of Seattle is often on the vanguard of policymaking in the state. And so we're hoping that by working in tandem with the state, but kind of pushing, it'll help get a statewide building emissions performance standard that is that has as much meat on it as ours does. Okay, and so as I mentioned, one of the keys is going to be support for building owners and incentives. And so there are some things that we are going to be doing as soon as we get the legislation passed, and in fact that we already do to a certain degree now, which is education and training, technical support, doing case studies, because it really helps us learn by doing so that we can refine and tweak things that may not work quite so well. And then really going after financial incentives. We are in this moment where there really is a lot of federal and state funding. Many of you might be familiar with the Climate Commitment Act at the state level, and at the federal level, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're in this position for the first time. I know we all think ironically of the name, the Inflation Reduction Act, but there is this moment where I don't want to say money isn't the problem, because we really do have to figure out how to create the partnerships, but we actually can create the partnerships. We're not in a place where scarcity might be preventing us from acting, which is a really wonderful place to be in. And so one of the resources that we have for building owners is what we're calling the Seattle Clean Buildings Accelerator. And so that's actually a pot of money that includes coaching and educational resources. There will be some funding that's prioritized for nonprofits, for those buildings that serve BIPOC communities. And it's really going to be about helping plan and helping identify further financial resources. And then we have a pot of money that we hope to grow that are actually engineering and capital investments that are available. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Horizon House and the proposal to be carbon neutral by 2032, which is really exciting. Okay, so Horizon House emissions, the good news is that we've already been working together for quite some time. So we have a really good picture of what Horizon House emissions already are. And so there are two things. There's one thing that I guess I'll start by just explaining. Horizon House is on what's called a district energy system. And for those of you who are not building owners, operators, or architects or engineers, I'm going to explain this in a very layperson's way, so I hope that's okay. But district energy is, first of all, a series of buildings are all on the same energy system, as opposed to having individual hookups that many other buildings would. And in this case, in this particular campus, Horizon House uses the waste heat that comes from Swedish Hospital. So, oh, not yet. That is what's coming. Sorry. That is what is coming. Thank you very much. Jean is keeping me on track. Thank you, Jean. So one of the challenges, of course, with a district heat system is that it still is natural gas powered, and so it still has carbon emissions that are associated with it. And so the point will be then to transition so that the district system is actually carbon neutral. So that's what we're going to be working with Horizon House to get to. So that is very exciting. And so in this particular building, the basics for reducing emissions are going to be, first of all, continuing the great energy efficiency and conservation work that's been happening now for many years around insulation, windows, LED lighting, and then upgrading equipment that uses higher emission fossil fuels to efficient electric, either through district system or direct electric hookups. So that means changing out boilers, having heat pump heating and cooling. It means heat pump hot water, and eventually induction cooking. Right now, that technology is probably going to be harder to take on right away, but we're hoping that over time, induction cooking will be something that we'll be able to work with you to swap in. And then, of course, part of a carbon neutral goal includes transportation and making sure that transportation is also being decarbonized. And so electric car sharing is coming to Horizon House in 2024. There are, of course, public transit senior passes from Metro. And again, as we are moving from a commuter-based transit system, we'll need to continue to invest in our commuters. I take transit downtown. But I think the real next effort is investing in transit so that people can get to their doctor's appointments, people can get to shopping. And this is both for seniors, for young people. One of the exciting things the state did this year, or maybe it was last year, was create a youth pass so that now all people under 18 have free transit. It's amazing. And so it's really exciting. And so really making sure that we're building out our transit system for people like folks who live at Horizon House, or like my daughter who goes to Lincoln High School in Wallingford, can use transit to get them where they want to go. So that's really, I think, our next challenge around transit. And then, of course, Seattle, I didn't talk too much about our waste because we have a very small portion of our emissions actually comes from waste. We've done a really great job in this city being leaders on composting, leaders on recycling. And this community has been great advocates over the years for those things, and also advocacy on energy efficient legislation. So that is just a little bit about this community's efforts and what it's going to take to get to carbon neutral by 2032. And I'm going to stop here, and then we can just go into some questions. I'm happy to do that, either about the presentation or anything else sustainability related. Why don't we keep it? We can ask questions later. Yes, in the back. Oh, I guess we have a, microphones. Great. Okay, so we will wait for microphones. Excellent.
What was your political office? What is induction cooking? And why would I want to drive in a car driven by one of us?
Okay, so I was a state legislator from the 46th district. I know there were some folks, I think Bill and Carol, you guys were both, and Peter here was former constituents, which is very exciting. So that was Northeast Seattle, Lake Forest Park, and Kenmore. So that was the first question. Second question, induction cooking. I'm not going to be able to explain it. If someone else would like to explain the technical, Bill, you want to come on up and help me out with induction cooking? Here we go. Great.
Induction. No, first of all,
Yeah.
Induction cooking is basically using the magnet concept. You put a metal pot on an electric burner, and it's not a burner anymore. It's the induction. It heats it's the concentration of I'm messing this up.
Yeah. It's
pretty badly,
yeah.
as a matter of fact.
We'll work on this. Next
right.
time we come, we'll have it down.
Here, I do it all the time, and I can't seem to describe it to you. But basically, it's using the process of using electric energy drawn to a metal pot by a magnet.
Exactly. Yep. And so really large-scale induction cook stoves are not widely available yet. So in our legislation, we actually are really putting off requirements around cooking because we think that there needs to be some progress made before we're really actually requiring that kind of change.
I don't think your rights were.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Is that better? Okay, I'll speak into it. Great. Thank you for letting me know. And then there was a third question, but I think that one was more of an editorial, so I don't think I'll answer that one.
Let me add that
Oh, sure. Was there someone that wanted to add
Horizon
something?
House is already
Is the
already
car-
providing.
I think I have it in my mouth. Okay.
Oh, great. Okay.
So when you say car sharing, I think Joan interpreted that meant that she may drive in a car driven by me. But my understanding, I'm looking for clarity, is that they've been talking about these zip cars or having a fleet of cars for us to use collectively. We
Yes.
take it out for an hour or two or whatever.
Great.
So what is car sharing?
Great clarification. So car sharing is where a community has access to a car. So individuals don't have to own the car and incur the costs as an individual of parking, insurance, maintenance. And it's especially helpful if you find yourself not needing to drive every single day or several times a day. So car sharing is where a community is able to invest in a fleet of cars that you can reserve when you need to use it and then bring it back when you're finished. So that's what car sharing is. Good moment to educate about car sharing. Other questions or comments?
Ruth, turn around.
Okay, great.
Can you go back to the slide about Horizon House? Because it went by pretty fast and I didn't really take it in. That one, yeah. Okay, so when you say steam, what do you mean by steam? Water, boiling, which requires what type of?
So in this case, it's natural gas that heats it up. And so what we need to do then is swap that out.
We don't want steam.
Steam is okay, but steam powered by natural gas is not. So you have to switch out the energy source of what heats up the steam. So that's what will reduce the emissions by moving away from natural gas. A district steam system in the context of building emission performance standards is actually a pretty good way to get a whole bunch of buildings decarbonized at once, because you can decarbonize the whole system. So the good news is that once you figure out how to power this, how to heat it up without natural gas, you are able to, decarbonize the whole campus. So
And have you
pretty
figured
great.
that out?
So the proposal is to use waste heat from Swedish Hospital.
Oh, I see.
And that's probably why you're confused, because I
Yeah,
got ahead of
totally.
myself in that
Yeah.
when I said that part. So
Okay. And then the electrical component, how is that created? How is the electricity created?
So some of the electricity is just through city light, and that is created through our hydropower.
Water.
Yep,
Okay,
through
there's
water.
something wholesome. Yeah.
Although I
So-
will say that's not without complication, because of course hydropower impacts tribes' access to exercising their treaty rights and being
Dams.
able to access salmon.
Right,
So it's not
right.
entirely uncomplicated.
Right. So you're suggesting that we're going to go with zero emissions, meaning what? Exactly what does that mean in terms of Horizon House?
So with Horizon House, that means 2 buckets of work. The first bucket is around decarbonizing the buildings themselves. And the main strategy is to take this district heating system that's currently powered by natural gas and switching that over. And again, the proposal is to use the excess heat that comes from Swedish and using that to power the steam that powers these buildings. So that's the work on the building side. And then on transportation, it's around making it easier for people to use electric cars, so investing in car sharing using electric cars. And of course, continuing to make sure that transit service is good and improving, that it's safe to walk and bike in this neighborhood. So making sure that people have options to not drive. So that's really the body of work ahead of us here. Yep, great questions. And I'll allow our microphones to.
Why isn't there more use of solar panels in the city? It seems to me that, we got a lot of roof.
Yeah, that's a good
And
question.
where our daughter is living in a 100-year-old house, it's got solar panels all over it, and because of her influence, the whole neighborhood has got solar panels. And that's in Portland.
Which is great, yep. And so part of this is certainly allowing large buildings to be able to have access to solar, and particularly on residential, that's going to be important. But probably most buildings are going to be focusing on, swapping into electric, or in the case of buildings on district steam like this campus, focusing on decarbonizing the steam. But solar is a really important part of it, even in a city that has a a pretty regular cloud cover in places like Denmark and Germany, solar is being deployed really well. And so we are working with building owners. We are working with our own regulatory environment in the city and in the state to make it easier.
Over here.
Okay, great.
We are in the planning process of putting up a rather large building here.
Yes.
And this may be a question for Erica more than you, but how is that building going to fit into this? And are we following all the proper procedures to get there so that when it goes up and is completed, it's zero compliant?
Yeah, that's right. And so the good news is that new buildings in Seattle do need to be zero emissions when they're built. So we're not having to go back and retrofit them. And so I will let maybe Erica answer the details on that, but I think the goal is that it would be electric when it opens. But
I was going to say I'm going to let Bill.
okay,
Bill's
great.
been a part
Okay,
of the
good.
committee.
There we go. Yep. Come on over. Here, you can just go ahead.
One reason we hired Methuen to design this building is for that very point. They're the most energy efficient organization, design organization there, and we're actually it's going to be a fully sustainable building and all electric, and basically use a heat pump system. As was mentioned earlier, we're looking at a district heat to make that even more efficient for the entire campus, not just the west wing or the west tower, but for the entire campus. So there are really two things to work on. One is the design is for the west tower. It will be completely carbon neutral, and getting the rest of the campus to catch up to that as well.
Excellent.
Just a quick question. What makes the electricity in the Swedish hospital? What's the source
So-
of electricity?
I think that's where we get into the creative energy. So currently, Swedish is also on a district heating system, and I think they're in the process. They currently have a natural gas powered system, and so I think they're in the process of moving to a different provider, and I think that's what would precipitate the ability of Horizon House to be able to build off of the work that they're doing. Yeah, so they also have they currently have they're also on a district heating system. So they use steam and it's heated up with natural gas. So they will probably electrify their steam, and then Horizon House would use the waste heat that comes from Swedish, right, exactly. And Swedish is a pretty significant energy, both user and waste energy creator, because it's such an intense building, several buildings of intense uses. So again, you're getting the layperson's explanation, so I hope that that is helpful. Yes.
Can you tell us if there's going to be any wind power usage involved in any of these projects here?
So wind power. So as you probably know, if you've been to Eastern Washington, there are now really pretty significant investments in wind energy, which is pretty exciting. And it is possible that an energy, a utility like City Light or like PSE could start to get some of its electricity from wind. City Light doesn't currently get much of it from wind, but as we're transitioning, to 100% clean energy sources, wind is probably going to be increasingly part of portfolios that they aren't currently part of. So for now, there isn't a lot of wind energy that is used in the cities, in the utilities that serve the city. But I would anticipate that over time, that's going to change.
First, just a clarification, I think you said earlier that white families have 10 times the income of black families?
10 times the family wealth.
I think you meant wealth, yeah.
Yep, wealth. Thank you. So if I
That's
said
a very-
income, you caught it. Yes,
very
it's
different
wealth.
problem.
It is. It's, yeah.
I'm just wondering, from your perspective, learning all that you're learning, do you think 2032 is either too aggressive or not aggressive enough?
So I think in part because there's such an effort to switch out the district steam. You know, again, one of the interesting things about being on a district steam system is that you get to change a whole bunch of buildings all at once. And so with that in mind, oh, that's okay. Maybe now it's a little dark. There it is. So I would say that actually makes me very optimistic, and the fact that Swedish is really kind of pushing, and also even the district energy providers themselves are realizing the writing on the wall that they're going to have to, if they want to keep customers on their systems, they're going to have to electrify. They're going to have to decarbonize their heat production. So I think 2032 is actually kind of right on the nose. It's probably the right target. It gives some more time for planning, because that needs to get done, and identifying the funding, and then, time to go in the latter part of the decade. That's kind of how I see it. And then, of course, the transportation side, we haven't talked about too much yet, and that, we still have a long ways to go on transportation. Yes.
Hi. Moving away from focus on Horizon House. Is that better? Okay. Since so much of the housing stock are individual homes, one of the big problems is the turnover rate, and that it really is a big call for somebody who owns a house to invest heavily when they may be selling it in a couple of years, and so that really dampens the whole incentive structure. Now, I understand that in progressive places, really progressive places, the power companies are incentivized to invest and then recoup the investment through user fees, which seems like a much more sensible arrangement. Is there anything like that in the works here?
So this is a place of, I think, tremendous opportunity and creativity. The question was around, what are we going to do about residential decarbonization? There are tens of thousands of single-family homes that we need to incentivize, cajole, require homeowners who may incur a pretty significant expense, right, to swap out a hot water, a natural gas, hot water, and electric, system to an electric heat pump system, right? And then all of the potential efficiency upgrades that you'd want to make as well. That can be a lot of money. So this, to me, is also an opportunity for no one single silver bullet. There actually, I think, will be a lot of different things we can do to get, all of these homes decarbonized. So one of the ideas you had was to use user fees as probably both a carrot and a stick, in a sense that you may end up having to pay more and then get an incentive to decarbonize. That's potentially one method. Another one is also just to get the incentives into the hands of people more quickly than we are. The incentives are just starting to roll out of the IRA. They're just starting to come out of the CCA. And one of the things I've been thinking about is, how do we scale the work that's happening? So for example, you have a contractor, the contractor maybe has 4 clients in a day. How do we help one, maybe focus by neighborhood, that contractor, so there's more efficiency, help the permitting so that you can permit a whole neighborhood at once? How are we using geography to help promote more efficiencies of scale? So that's one of the things that I want my team and SDCI, our buildings, our and inspections folks, to start to think through how can we help contractors be able to use kind of a neighborhood level planning almost to do more at once in a particular neighborhood. So that's one area where I think there's opportunity. Another area is, and sorry, I won't go into this too much, but this is a place where a lot of creative thinking is needed right now. But I'll just throw one other idea out. When you sell your house, maybe there's a way to get an incrementally larger mortgage so that you can build all of the costs of decarbonizing into that nice 30-year fixed rate federally backed mortgage, which is high right now, but you hope that mortgage rates will go back down again. And so, you know, the cost of money for that kind of thing would just be cheaper. So that's another idea, but it's a really big problem of creativity and scale right now, less around the money, because we have to figure out how to get the money out the door. Okay, that was a long answer, but there's a lot there.
You lost me with jargon.
Okay.
What is IRA and CCA?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so IRA is the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, and that is the set of lots and lots and lots of funding to do many different things around changing our economy, really from a fossil fuel-based economy to a green energy economy. The size of the investments are that big. It will change our economy. So that's the federal set of investments. And so one piece of that is there are incentives now that are available to homeowners. And the problem that government faces is how do we get those incentives out the door quickly? And how do we do it in a way that helps people get to all of the different places where they can get incentives? CCA is the state set of investments. A couple years ago, the state created a carbon market called the Climate Commitment Act, and you auction off carbon credits, and it's raising lots of money as well, because of course. So each, I think it's by sector, and then within that, by individual company, you basically have to pay a fee for emitting carbon. That's the most basic idea. But the market sets what that fee is. So how much do you buy and sell it is kind of a market-based approach. And it's raising quite a bit of money. I don't remember exactly how much every time they do it, but we're now upwards of $1 billion to spend on decarbonizing our communities. Yes. Oh, and you have a microphone, so there you go. Great.
I'm not sure I say this word quite right, but I know cities in California are using solar power and they're using photovoltaic batteries or photovoltaic cells. You haven't mentioned that. Is that applicable to Seattle and to the Northwest as a way of conserving or stretching your energy?
Yeah, you know, I will say it's interesting. California is so far ahead of us on solar. They're also really far ahead of us on electric vehicles, for example, too. And so I will say, yes, they're absolutely applicable to...
Where does photovoltaic cells come in, or photovoltaic?
Photovoltaic, I don't say it much more fluently, but, and again, this is where I'm very much a layperson. The city hasn't done a lot in this area, but I think the basic idea is that you get energy from the sun, it's captured on a solar panel, and then you're able to kind of store the energy in a photovoltaic cell. Bill, I'm looking at my resident energy expert here. Okay, good. So, yeah.
I have a question that follows that very nicely.
Okay, great. And I can get into that a little more. Yep.
So many of the solutions involve electrification,
Yep.
and my concern is our regional electric grid strong enough to handle all this? It's doing much less now than we're hoping it will do soon.
Yep, that's it. So do you want me to go into any of that a little bit more around whether solar panels and photovoltaic cells are applicable in the city, and then I can get to that question.
Well, for one example, I have a little knowledge of
Yeah.
San Francisco. A lot of San Francisco has fog, so you don't get
Yeah.
a lot of direct solar. But the times they do get direct solar, they get more solar than they can sell to Pacific Gas and Electric, or what California calls PG&E, kind of like our Seattle Puget Sound Energy.
Yeah.
So the photovoltaic cells there help you to store energy in your single or double house or duplex overnight, and at 8 or 9, then you use the
Yep.
backed up energy, or even early morning if you're running a refrigerator or freezer.
Yep.
So it's a way of extending solar panel energy over a 24 or 36-hour grid.
Yep. And so what I will say is, yes, solar technology and storage, battery storage or voltaic storage is absolutely applicable. And I think what we're kind of up against is almost like a war effort, in that it is really about capacity and how much can we do and how quickly can we do it. Like my team of complete, rock stars is laser-like focused on getting building emissions performance standards passed. But that's not all the work that we have to do, right? We have a lot of work to do around residential. We have a lot of work to do on transportation, solar. So it's really this moment where to actually make this transition, it is as big an effort as what it took to get the United States out of the Great Depression, the investments that were made during World War II. I mean, the scale really is that big. And so the reason we haven't done that yet is because we have a team of 10. They're amazing people, but it's 10 people, right? But we'll get there. Okay, and so I'm sorry, what was your question again?
My question was about whether we have an electric grid that's going to be capable to manage all this electrification that we're planning.
Yep, so City Light has a really good long-range plan.
Okay.
They've been very successful. They are going to continue to be really successful in getting federal funding to do the upgrades. I think the thing that is probably something that will be a little harder to sort through is how do we manage hydropower, particularly in the face of treaty rights and glacial melt. And I know City Light is thinking through all of those things. But I actually feel like the grid is in some ways a little more straightforward than these other things related to hydropower. Okay, great. Other questions? Okay.
This is just a bit of encouragement. One of my families has not paid a cent for electricity for several years. They have sold back, and they got it through Washington State incentives.
That's great. That's a great encouragement. I mean, that's the idea, right? That these transitions actually benefit you. Like, that's the whole point. I will say, I put a heat pump in after the heat dome a couple years ago, and it's fantastic, right? So that is the hope, that these things are going to benefit people from a comfort standpoint, from a financial standpoint, while reducing emissions.
Well, that's what I'm confused about, because at least 10 years ago, when we had our house, we put solar panels on it in a program like you're describing, and we got money back every year. So what happened to the program? Why are we talking about the future? It's already been happening.
Yeah, and those are the things that need to be scaled. That's exactly right.
Oh,
yeah.
Scale it up.
Yeah, scale it up.
The program still exists
I
for
believe it
single-family
does,
homes.
yeah.
Because for us, it was a selling factor that we'd put solar energy on our house.
Although I will say, especially a decade ago, there was still a lot of debate as to whether we should be investing in solar. Like when I was in the legislature, we were fighting constantly over whether we should keep those incentives in place, and there were some years where they went away and some years where they came back in. So keeping those programs going over the last several years was really the effort, and now it's time to scale them. That's really the issue. And scaling is a word, but what's underneath that is making sure we have the solar panel technicians who can install them, making sure we have enough electricians who can go do all of this work, making sure that our permitting systems aren't getting in the way, making sure that contractors have the fleets. There There are a lot of different layers that being able to source the materials. We all know that we've had supply chain issues, particularly during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So scaling is a word I use, but underneath that are a lot of different discrete actions and kind of broader issues that need to be addressed that we're sorting through in real time. Other questions? Okay.
Is this on? Okay.
Yep.
This is a comment, not a question, but our household and family was involved in some of the history of city light conservation, at which there was a residential conservation program started in the mid-1970s, and my wife retired from Beverly Corwin, retired from managing that in, because it was 97, about 20 years. But anyway, that was a step along in the history of this that we take some pride in.
I think that's a really great point, which is City Light has truly been a leader. Like one of the many assets that our community has is, number one, City Light's conservation efforts that are now decades old. That's a really great thing that we have. And that we have a publicly owned utility that is virtually carbon neutral because it is hydropower. And so we have this asset that a lot of communities would really love to have. So we're really in a position with City Light and the work that's been happening for a long time that is really enviable, even though there's still a lot of work before us. But there's some things we don't have to do because we've been doing them already.
You just briefly touched on this in your presentation, and that's tree canopy, which obviously can help us in addition to heat pumps. But my question is, when we are looking at what growth management is wanting to do in terms of reducing single-family homes and put multifamily homes in, wouldn't that then reduce tree canopy? Because it seems to me that our tree canopy has already been reduced from 10 years ago. And right now we have a bunch of trees right outside this window that are dying. And they're large trees, and I don't know what the city is doing about that or what we can do about it.
Yep, great question. Okay, so I'm going to go a little wide lens on that one to start with, which is to say my office does our tree canopy assessment that happens every 6 years. And so that we just concluded that work. And the sad news is that we are slowly losing ground. The city lost about the size of Green Lake worth of trees across the city. And that was for a range of reasons. The biggest area, interestingly, where we lost tree canopy was from what we call our parks natural areas. So places like Discovery Park, Seward Park, places with big old trees, in part because it's hard to be a tree right now. Climate change is really impacting trees. A lot of our trees were planted 70 and 80 years ago, maybe not native species, and are actually coming to the end of their life. We have barely maintained maintenance budgets over years and often end up cutting our maintenance budgets, so we don't have as much to take care of our trees. So one of the things the city is doing, and my office is really working with parks and with SDOT and other departments, is to really create a sized out plan of what it's going to take to not just save the trees that we have, but really invest to reach our city's goal of having a 30% canopy cover. So that is going to be doing things like preserving trees in our parks natural areas. But you're now asking about our housing and trees in our housing areas. And in our city, the vast majority of our trees, almost 60%, are actually on private land. So we do need to be preserving trees on private property. At the same time, we are in a really significant housing crisis, and so we do need more housing. And there are a lot of things that we can do differently to make sure that we have more density and that we're saving trees on lots and doing it in a way that allows us to build more densely by saving trees. And I'm gonna go off script a little bit and say one of the things that we do is we kind of put trees bottom of the list on all of the things that we require a builder to do. We require a garage before we require you to save a tree. And I'm going to argue in a time of climate change, we should be preserving the tree and giving a builder, you don't have to build that garage on, the parking, the storage for cars. So those are the kinds of things that to me seem like kind of pretty, not easy, because no bureaucratic obstacle is easy, but maybe commonsensical changes that we can make so that we're not in this position where we're pitting trees against more housing, because unfortunately, that often is the case. The other thing we can do is do a lot better inventorying of our culturally significant trees, trees that are important to our tribes, and more protections around very large trees. But again, giving a little flexibility. Maybe we're going a little easier on how close to the sidewalk you can build. Maybe so you can save the big tree in the backyard, because as a society, we want to promote both the housing and the trees, but it means a little more flexibility. So that's my editorial, but we and what we're focused on is having really good data so that we can make decisions that are based on what we know is going to help preserve trees. Okay.
Well, if there are no more questions, we'd like to really thank Jessyn for coming here tonight. And there will be more information on a number of these things that have been raised. We can't really talk specifically about them because they're still in the planning stage. One, of course, is the car sharing, and we hope to have much more specifics on that in the coming months, as an example. There are a number of other things we're doing, and it's good to be able to begin to talk about them. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This was really wonderful. And thank you to Bill for making it happen, and to Jean for making it happen.